In my very early days of Commodore 64 ownership, I was lucky enough to have gotten a whole shed load of games to play on it, and some of my earliest memories of that time were of this game, Choplifter by Broderbund. Choplifter was a very basic game indeed, a lot like most other games from this time period, but when you're a 6-year-old kid, you don't care about stuff like that. All that mattered was the game was loads of fun. A lot of younger gamers are going to get confused and wonder what all the fuss is about. It's not much to look at now. It wasn't even much to look at back then either, with its very monochromatic graphics, absence of decent sound and atmosphere, but I did enjoy it at the time. The game has this whole sort of Defender vibe about it, with you being able to fly either left or right and having to save hostages and return them safely back to the relative harmless confines of the post office? Visually, everything is black or white, but these little cabin things that contain the hostages have a little more colour to them, and so do the hostages, although it is kind of hard to make out. When rescuing the hostages, if you sit still too long, an enemy tank will appear and try and shoot you down. But fear not, as you can hover and drop bombs on the tanks to get rid of them. I loved this game for a few reasons. The first one being, it didn't take too long to load on the Commodore 64, and the other being, back then, I was actually pretty good at this game. So when playing the game with my sister, I would get a decent amount of time on it. The game is very repetitive. If it were not for the random nature of the enemy aircraft flying about, the game would be routine almost. But the game did provide a fairly good challenge, and when playing it those first few times, it was tough to rescue enough hostages to get the magnificent message. But in 1982, this was about as good as early home video gaming was going to get. I remember playing a very similar game to Choplifter on this 50 game cassette tape, but I cannot remember what it was called. But I do remember it being a bit more colourful and pleasing on the eye, and to be fair, once the Commodore 64 had been around for a few more years, there were far better games to play on it, and so Choplifter is a game that sadly did not get too much game time from me over those early years. That was until I stumbled upon it in an arcade cabinet when the shows came into town a few years later. Usually, I will start my videos with the arcade version of a game, as most of the time, the arcade version was the first version I would have played. But Choplifter had always started out life on home micros, but as this game was so popular, Sega decided to purchase a license for it, and they released a remake in the arcades. Although, I did question myself if it was indeed the same game. If you look at the title screen, it appears that the chopper is shooting at the hostages instead of saving them. I put in my 20p anyway and had a go, and straight away What Sega did was add much more colour to the game. And not only that, it was made so much faster as well. With 2 buttons, the helicopter was much easier to control as well, and this made it even more enjoyable to play. The sound as well was enhanced, although the sound effects are still pretty dire, even for an arcade game, but the music added some atmosphere to the game. And I found the arcade version to be much more challenging, especially when compared to the Commodore 64 version. But the biggest surprise to me was that this game had different levels. The first level was pretty much the same idea as the Commodore 64 version, but the second level was set at sea, which did reduce the amount of landing areas you could use when rescuing hostages, and the tanks were replaced with submarines. The next level gets all claustrophobic, as you have to rescue hostages from a cave, which spouts lava balls which you have to avoid, while avoiding stalactites from above also, so it was very challenging. I do remember playing this game a lot when the shows had come into town with my mates, and then going home and playing it on a Commodore 64, and the look on my mates' faces as they thought it was a completely different game. I had always hoped for an improved version of Choplifter on the Commodore 64, a version based on the Sega one, but alas, I never found one. But a few years later, when I got my Sega Master System, I got a copy of Choplifter with my Sega, and I was so happy to be able to play the arcade version once again. When I first fired up Choplifter on the Master System, I was so impressed. To me, this was an exact replica of the arcade version. And I thought this as I hadn't played the arcade in a few years. But with the beauty of MAME and hindsight, I can see there are quite a few differences between the two versions. But in my opinion, Choplifter on a Master System is a great game and a good port. It still has the brightly coloured visuals of the arcade version. And with the SMS pad having 2 buttons, it was just as easy to control as well. The sound is a little rubbish, but sound was always the Achilles heel for the Master System, and so I won't really be too harsh on it. But the beeps and whatever that sound is when the chopper fires do get annoying after a while. But thankfully, the game is still lots of fun to play. It is a very challenging game too, much tougher than the arcade I think, and the third level in the caves is super tough. But back in my younger days when I had this game, I had found this little trick to make the cave level easier. I would fly in backwards. Doing this limits the amount of time for the enemy aircraft to appear, but it does also give you a little less time to avoid the stalactites, so watch out if you try it for yourself. The little Master System cartridge could not fit all of the levels from the arcade, so instead of 4, you have 3, and then the same 3 are replayed but are much tougher second time around. as this was a game I got with my Master System. I played it a lot. In the UK, Master System games were pretty dear compared to the home micros. On average, each game was about £20. And as you couldn't copy your mate's games either, it meant it was going to be a while before I got a sizable collection of games. So you made do with what you got, but thankfully Choplifter was a great game. But I do remember my mum asking me about my choice of console. She remembered me playing Choplifter on the Commodore 64, and so she thought that the Master System was basically the same as the Commodore 64, as it had one game on it that the format shared. And of course, she came out with the classic parental line of, "I cannot tell the difference. Are these graphics better?" Of course they were. Anyway, Choplifter was a great little game, and over the years it would spawn a few sequels and appear on several other systems, none of which I ever played, as they didn't look that different, or that good actually. But I will always have fond memories of the original versions I played as a kid. And that was my look back at Choplifter. If you like this video, then please do give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below about your memories of Choplifter on any format. And a massive thank you to all of those who have subscribed and commented on my channel. Your feedback and support goes a long way in helping the channel grow, and I do appreciate all of you, so thank you from me. And that's all from me, folks. Thanks for watching.